stopping the small boat crossings is one of the Prime Minister's declared 5 goals for government. Some of his MPs tell him their voters talk of little else. Rishi Sunak visited the Home Office Joint Control Room in Dover to see how boats are monitored crossing the Channel.
We've got to somehow break the cycle of these criminal gangs.
The Prime Minister's plan to break the cycle is yet another bill, removing the right to seek asylum from those who enter Britain this way and deporting them to make the slogan, now stuck on the lectern, a reality.
I wouldn't be standing here if I didn't think that I could deliver on this promise. At the beginning of the year, I stood up in front of the British people, made 5 promises, and one of them was to stop the boats. And since I've had this job, I've spent a lot of time thinking long and hard about how to solve this problem. And I'm confident that the bill we're introducing today will help us do that.
Rishi Sunak said those coming by small boats needed to be deterred, and his planned laws would do that.
We will detain those who come here illegally and then remove them in weeks, either to their own country, if it is safe to do so, or to a safe third country like Rwanda. And once you are removed, you will be banned, as you are in America and Australia, from ever re-entering our country.
Since 2018, the number of boat crossings has risen, and anger amongst some voters with it. The government's attempt to deport migrants to Rwanda stalled in the courts, and many believe this latest effort could quickly head the same way. The bill, very unusually, on the cover, says the Home Secretary is unable to make a statement that the provisions of the illegal migration bill are compatible with the Convention rights. In a letter to Tory MPs, the Home Secretary conveys the legal advice that there is a more than 50% chance the provisions may not be in line with the Convention. But, she goes on, we remain confident that this bill is compatible with international law.
La Cour.
One judge with 14 years' service on the European Court of Human Rights says the proposed laws could breach international law on issues like access to justice, unlawful detention, enshrined in Articles 5, 3 and 13 of the European Convention.
It seems pretty clear to you why lawyers in government think this could quite easily, more than 50% chance by the government's own reckoning, breach the European Convention.
Yes, I can, and I must say I found the statement a little bit curious to say that they couldn't give a statement of compatibility with the Convention, but nevertheless were satisfied that it was compliant with international law. Of course, the Convention is an important part of international law for this purpose.
And at first glance, you can see 3 articles which, from your knowledge of the way the European Court works, could easily see Britain found in breach.
Yes, potentially 3 articles.
Of course we're up for the fight and wouldn't be standing here if we weren't. But we're confident that we will win.
The Prime Minister said word would quickly spread amongst potential migrants that their chances of asylum here were 0 the moment they boarded a small boat. But Samuel Nejat from Afghanistan, who arrived on a boat with more than 50 others in October, says he'd already heard about the Rwanda deportation policy back then, and it didn't stop him risking his life on a Channel crossing.
People say that England is welcoming, but it doesn't feel it. We Afghans don't come here because of a want or in happiness. We come here because of a need. It feels like all these countries are so against us Afghans. They refuse us, and I can't understand why. We had no other choice, so we came here. There had already been the announcement about being sent to Rwanda, but I came anyway.
Here we go. Hi. Rishi Sunak was asked this evening if Britain should leave the European Convention on Human Rights if this policy didn't work. He said he didn't think that was necessary. Many to the right of him in his own party are already saying his new policy will soon founder because of the legal constraints of life as a signatory to the Convention, bound by its court.
Well, tonight we are live in Dover and Calais to get the latest from both sides of the Channel. First, though, let's get more from Westminster and our political editor, Gary Gibbon. Gary.
When the Home Secretary spoke to the Commons this afternoon, you got a real flavour of what we were talking about in that report. Scepticism on the right of the Tory party about whether you can really do anything on small boats unless you've left the ECHR. Hard sometimes to disentangle what people on the different parts of the Tory party are saying about a Rishi Sunak policy from sort of factionalism and hatred. But for many Tories on the right, this is a long-held view, and they're just not convinced it will work without that sort of rupture. Rishi Sunak himself, MPs who've been in to see him for private briefings about this policy, say they come out of the room feeling he genuinely believes this time he's found a formula that will actually work and will stop the boats. Some people who went in to have briefings from Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, said they came away a little bit wondering whether she was utterly convinced of that. Her body language, some of her tone left them wondering whether she thought this one would really work. Some people close to the Prime Minister saying, though, they hope that even if it doesn't work or only works partially, maybe the voters will give him the credit for clearly trying, creating such a fuss, so much upset in parts of the political landscape that he clearly was determined. And they hope as well, many in the Tory party, that this will prove an effective dividing line with Labour. The Labour front bench very much carefully trying to walk the right side of all of this and talk about competence in government and this government destroying the asylum system. But some backbenchers, I think Suella Braverman felt, gifting her the line of talking about red wall xenophobia, which she gleefully threw back at them.
Gary, thanks very much. Well, let's go live now to our political reporter, Serena Barker-Singh, who's in Dover. Serena.
This new plan was announced by the Home Secretary, but it was personally rubber-stamped by the Prime Minister himself. Now, you saw that press conference earlier, but before that, he was here in Dover meeting Border Force staff. And the reason for that was for a press opportunity, which he was meant to have with Suella Braverman. But the particular cold weather here meant that the helicopter that he was meant to take had to be switched out for a car, which meant that he arrived alone because of timings. But that also meant that when he arrived here, he said that he saw a deterrence effect that he'd spotted from initiatives he put in last year. Now, the view on the ground here is that the weather is much more likely to be blamed for that. New Home Office figures released today show that too. So in the last 5 days, they've said that they've not seen any small boat crossings because of this weather. And only yesterday there were people brought ashore because of the mild conditions. But the bigger question is the Home Office and previous Prime Ministers have all promised the same thing. And one senior civil servant that I spoke to in the previous administration at the Home Office said that the challenges were the real problem, the legal challenges with any new policy in this area, and that the last Home Secretary had really strained every sinew to stop the small boats crossings. They wondered if this plan could be any better.
Serena, thanks very much. Well, the former Immigration Minister under David Cameron and Kent MP is Damien Green. He joins us now from Central Lobby. Thanks very much for coming on the programme, Damien Green. Let me start off with this point that was, frankly, is rather bizarre, that unusually this government has said, here's a new law that might break the law. How do you explain that?
Well, it's not saying that. It's the Attorney General saying that it's about 50-50, but...
yeah, but 50-50 is still 50%, breaking the law. That's quite a lot, isn't it?
No, I mean, it's one or the other. It's binary, but and she doesn't believe it does break our international obligations, and I think.
What about our British law?
Well, similarly, I mean, Parliament can pass laws that supersede previous British laws, so that's not an issue. If this law, or when this law is passed, then it will be the law, and so therefore our courts will have to implement it.
Do you think that some members of your party are okay with that? Because actually they don't like the European Convention on Human Rights. They rather want to get rid of it, or certainly get rid of it as far as we're concerned. And this might be a path to that aim. Is that correct?
I don't know. I think we should stay in the European Convention on Human Rights, and I also know that what my constituents and other people around the country care about is stopping the boats, stopping tens of thousands of people coming to this country illegally, and they care more about that than anything else. And I think this package of measures today not only means that a lot of the interminable legal challenges that we've seen in previous attempts to impose more control over this won't be allowed, as well as having extra law enforcement activity, better cooperation with the French, and all the other things we need at the Channel.
So there are questions around the legality of it, there are questions around the compassion of it, but let's deal with the practicality of it, because ever since previous Home Secretary Sajid Javid tightened up the law, every year that has coincided with many more boats coming, and quite dramatically so. I mean, in 2021 we had 28,000 boats, or people coming by boats. In 2022 we had 45,000. So are you actually certain, as the Prime Minister seems to be, that by tightening up the law, you're going to actually make this work?
Yes, I mean, because of the other measures that are being taken, if you know that you're going to be detained and then your case assessed and turned round, then that will stop the pull factor of this.
But the deterrence doesn't work. It hasn't worked so far. What makes you think it's going to work now?
Well, because we haven't done this before. This is a novel approach of having people detained and so on. And also, you mentioned compassion. I don't think it's compassionate to encourage international criminal gangs to put people's lives at risk by coming across the Channel.
And no one is saying that that particular aspect of it is compassion. But I just wonder about the practicality. You've got 160,000 pending cases, right? That's before the fresh boats have come across this year. What are you going to do with all these people?
Well, process them through the system.
But just rubber stamping them. Are you going to do that much faster than before?
No, well, you can do it much faster. It used to be done faster. The COVID pandemic meant that the asylum system clearance and actually moving the cases through went far too slowly. I know the Immigration Minister is working very hard to improve that. We will have to improve that, certainly. And also, some of the measures here, we know that a third of the people who came across by boat last year were Albanian. We're now returning people to Albania. That will make a significant difference to the numbers.
You've got to deal with Albania, but you're not going to get deals with Syria or with Afghanistan or with Iran, some of the other countries where people are coming from. I just also wonder, there was a massive hullabaloo about the Rwanda policy. It was trumpeted by the government. Not a single person has been sent to Rwanda yet. And so the government dreamt, that was her big dream, sending people to Rwanda. It simply hasn't worked. And I wonder if the same will happen with these other people that will arrive, especially because the preamble says this might break law.
The Rwanda policy is going through the courts. Again, we've had delays in the courts, but that will be resolved in the course of the next few months, and then that will work. And you mentioned Syria and Afghanistan. There are legal routes to come from both those countries. So I think that example is particularly bad, that actually we have got safe and legal routes. And the other half of this policy is to establish safe and legal routes for the rest of the world and the countries that need it. And that will be the way through in the long term.
Just briefly, last year 8,000 people came illegally from Afghanistan and 22 came legally, so clearly there's a problem there.
Well, there are many people who came legally from Afghanistan. I know I've got a hotel full of them in my constituency. So it is possible to come legally from Afghanistan. And clearly we need to extend that to other spots around the world where we know there will be lots of refugees. So Britain ends up taking its fair share of people who are legally allowed to come here and don't have a lot of people coming who don't have the right to claim asylum.
Got to leave it there, I'm afraid. Damien Green, thank you very much indeed. Now, today, speaking in the House of Commons, the shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, accused the government of coming up with slogans and not with solutions, which would end up letting people smugglers off the hook, while the government said that Labour didn't have a plan. Well, joining me now is the chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, Labour MP, Dame Diana Johnson. Dame Diana Johnson, thank you very much for coming on the programme. What difference do you think this new law will make?
I think this law is fraught with legal complications. We know already the Home Secretary has said that she's not sure it's compliant with the convention, the European Human Rights Convention. But secondly, practical problems. We know the Home Office have struggled to find accommodation for asylum seekers, and yet under this scheme, thousands and thousands who will come across this year in small boats will be put into detention. Now, where are those places going to be? And secondly, the idea they'll then be removed within 28 days. Where exactly are they going to be removed to? Because we know the Rwanda scheme isn't up and running yet. It's still going through the courts. And there's only other limited agreements with other countries to return their own nationals. So I just think practically this is fraught with difficulties.
OK, so you don't think it's going to work practically. Is there any part of you that thinks that this is ethically wrong?
Well, from the Home Affairs Select Committee point of view, we did a report last summer. We made a number of recommendations to government, and we included in there ways to tackle the small boats problem. Safe and legal routes, and I know you've talked about that a little bit with the previous MP. We also said you need a returns policy with the EU. That hasn't been negotiated yet.
Do you think this new law is unethical?
Well, the Home Affairs Select Committee hasn't taken a view on this yet. We've asked to do pre-legislative scrutiny on the bill so we can look at whether this bill will actually work and whether, as you say, it is ethical. I certainly, as a Labour MP, have real doubts about this legislation, but the committee itself hasn't looked at it just yet.
I mean, if you could advise a Labour government, what would you advise them in practical terms to do about these enormous numbers of people, both coming across and the existing backlog of 160,000 in the country?
The first thing to do is to get rid of the backlog, deal with that, because once you've dealt with the gummed up system, you can get people through and processed much quicker. Well, if you put resources in, staffing, really focused on that, that would be my first thing, and that's the main recommendation in our report last summer. Deal with the backlog. Get the agreement with the EU on returns, that's important too. Target those serious organised crime groups that are behind the trafficking, more emphasis on dealing with that. So there are several things you do.
But that's exactly what the Tories are saying. I mean, that's exactly what the government's been saying. The question really is, you know, if Labour gets into power, they will inherit an enormous issue here. I just wonder what Labour could do that would make this issue go away.
One of the recommendations we made in our report was to pilot in France, on French soil, the opportunity for people to make asylum claims to come to the UK. Now, if that could be piloted and we could see whether that worked, and obviously you'd need to negotiate that with the French, we felt that that was a way of tackling, stopping people getting into those very dangerous small boats. So that's something we've suggested to the government and we'll suggest to the Labour Party as well.
Dame Diana Johnson, thanks very much. And we'll be speaking about the French angle to a French MP in a minute. Now, almost 200 people, including children, attempted to cross the Channel in the early hours of Monday, some at risk of hypothermia after they were found along a freezing stretch of the French coastline, but undeterred, it seems, by the prospect of Britain's proposed new ban. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Porrick O'Brien, is in Calais now. Porrick.
Matt, in fairness to the government, I don't think they're expecting the deterrent effect of this legislation to kick in overnight. But remember, that is ultimately what this is about. We've heard a lot about the legality, we've heard a lot about the politics. This is fundamentally about changing people's behaviour. The government are banking on would-be refugees and migrants looking at Britain as a destination, weighing up the possibility of being detained and deported, and then deciding against coming here. Which brings us to the crux of this whole issue. Why do asylum seekers and refugees decide to come to Britain? Well, back in 2002, the Home Office commissioned a report into the motivations of migrants and refugees, into this very thing. And I wanted to quickly quote you a section of it. It reads, asylum seekers in the UK are guided more by agents, that's smugglers, the presence or absence of family and friends, language and perceived cultural affinities, than they are by scrutiny of asylum policies or rational evaluation of the welfare benefits on offer. So assuming the Home Office reads their own report, they know that these choices are complicated, and the government and the Home Office are taking a gamble here with this particular piece of legislation. We spent the day in Calais talking to refugees and migrants, trying to ascertain the extent to which this new legislation is on their radar. Today's legislation is designed to deter these men from coming to Britain on small boats, to modify their behaviour, to make them make different decisions. The idea, create conditions that are so unfavourable if you arrive by boat that you won't bother trying. The problem is that when it comes to enduring hardship, some of these people have a very high threshold indeed. Usman is from Gambia. On a clear day, he can see his ultimate destination, Britain, from here. The last leg, just 20 miles left. He's already notched up over 5,000. People here are talking about the new legislation, and this is typical of the response we got. But will that kind of legislation stop you from trying?
No, it doesn't stop me trying. It doesn't stop me trying. Just as I say, because of the call, I don't go.
I see. So you're just waiting for the weather to get better. You're not worried about this new law. You're just going to try.
Yeah, I just gonna try because I know when I go, it don't found, there I'll have a better life than here. They are gonna have a better life.
I went on to ask him about the prospect of being detained and deported if his claim is considered inadmissible. He smiled. Turned out he'd spent 5 months in a Libyan detention centre en route to Britain.
He'll shoot them with gun, he'll wound them with knife, they take all your properties, things like that, you know.
Did you see that happening in Libya?
I see happen to people, I see they do to people.
Compared to what he's experienced, the threat of deportation in the UK really doesn't cut through for Usman. The track record around the world when it comes to deterrence policies actually working is patchy, to put it mildly. Changing the behaviour of migrants and refugees is not an easy thing to do. Let's step back in time. From up here you really get a sense of the sprawling nature of the jungle camp. One activist group that surveys the population of the jungle put the figure a few days ago at nearly 10,000 people. 7 years ago, no one was talking about small boats. Everyone was talking about the jungle Calais. This is the site today. The jungle was eventually dismantled, the port was secured, and people then started opting for small boats instead of jumping on lorries. The big question now, this time round, is has Rishi Sunak cracked it? The problem is if you make asylum illegal by dint of people arriving on small boats, then of course you have to deport them, and you have to deport them to some country. The migrants we're talking to are not convinced that that policy will hold. To have any hope of changing people's behaviour by deterrent, the first step, they have to believe that the threat is real. And for many, heading for the UK via Calais, no degree of threat trumps what they've already been through.
Warwick O'Brien on the beaches of Calais. Well, the United Nations Refugee Agency has tonight urged MPs here and peers to block the plan, saying that they would be a clear breach of the Refugee Convention and would undermine Britain's long-standing humanitarian tradition. Well, we're joined now from Brussels by the French MEP Fabienne Keller, who's on the Parliament's Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs. Fabienne Keller, good to see you on the programme again. Let's start, first of all, with what France might offer Britain, because we know that the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, will meet President Macron in a few days' time. This is the first bilateral meeting, actually, in 5 years. What can France offer Britain to make our small boats crisis any better?
I can tell you, because I was on the ground a few days ago, last Tuesday, that France is doing a lot at the frontier of the Channel. I was in Calais. There are more than 300 people working, policemen, frontier policemen, but also other security people, trying to prevent the organization of a crossing by boat. And you know, this is a huge organization with human traffickers organizing groups of migrants and the boats themselves coming in pieces from Germany.
Of course, but I mean,
so
people,
France is doing a lot.
Indeed, but people in this country still want to know why the number of people coming across increases exponentially every year. If France is doing as much as you say it is, how come 45,000 people managed to cross last year?
Because they are trying at night or at different times, and because the British labour market is very attractive. The people who are able to cross seem to be very quickly included in an informal market because they don't get the right to work. Apparently, they find a position very quickly, and they don't want to ask for asylum on the French side in the rest of Europe. They don't ask for it. They have the right to do so. They are asked if they want to do so, but they don't.
And why
they want to cross? And
okay, so but do you think it's possible that President Macron might offer Rishi Sunak that he will take some of them back? Because the British government is desperate to send them back. They just don't know where to send them. Would France take some of them back?
But it does not make sense. This is what we do already from the beach. People trying to get on the boat and then they are discouraged. The boats are usually taken away, but they have places where they can rest. And a few days later, the people I met told me that the people taking care of them for a few days to be warm again, to have some food, and then they try again.
Right.
It's
maybe you can be more accommodating.
And may I say that? I'm sorry?
Maybe you could be more accommodating for them not to leave.
You are asking us to put them under
retention. Okay, all right.
They did not do any crime.
Okay,
but what is sure is that to find a solution, British and European Union must work together because they are Pakistanis, because they are coming from different parts of Africa, or sometimes from the Central Europe countries.
Indeed.
And